On my 4th birthday, I woke up at 5 a.m. to the sound of terrified, screaming children. A Somali Bantu family had just arrived from Kenya and landed in our home. The children, ages 4, 2, and 6 months old, had made the long 20-hour flight without diapers. And I'm sure you can imagine, the acrid smell of urine urged my mother to bathe them at the first opportunity. I watched as the 6-month-old wriggled in my mother's arms, terrified of the loud rushing water cascading from the faucet. This was their first exposure to an indoor bathtub. After drying them off, my mother searched around for their clean clothes, only to realize that they didn't have any. They had arrived only with the clothes they were wearing. Fortunately, my brother and I had a closet full of clothes that we could lend them. I scurried around my room, rummaging through my drawers, looking for something that might fit them. This was literally my wake-up call to the world of refugees. Over the next 10 years, we resettled refugee families from countries like Iraq, Zimbabwe, Myanmar, and Nepal. They became part of our family, celebrating Christmas, birthdays, and 4th of July with us. With the help of our neighbors and church friends, our garage became a warehouse for donated furniture and household goods, which we would pass along to World Relief, which is a major resettlement agency. They would regularly come and they would pick up the furniture in our garage, whether that's dressers, dining tables, mattresses, you name it. But let me ask you a question. What is a refugee? A refugee is a person forced to flee their country because of violence or persecution. Today, the world has more refugees than ever before. Currently, 45 million people have been forced out of their homes. These 45 million have remained in their country, which makes them internally displaced people, also known as IDPs. However, an additional 22 million have been forced out of their country and have crossed international borders. Displaced people who have crossed international borders are called refugees. Today, I'll be talking about refugees, not internally displaced people. 1% of all refugees are resettled in a new country to restart their lives. That's 1 out of every 100 people. In 2015, my family and I moved to Jordan to aid the Syrian refugees. In northern Jordan, there's a city called Mafraq, close to the Syrian border. Mafraq is home to 100,000 Syrian refugees. I would spend my weekends and school holidays visiting with them in their homes, learning about their stories of escaping the war. Meet Farouk. Farouk is an 11-year-old boy. On the way to Jordan as he escaped the war, he was hit by shrapnel. And he suffers from incontinence, which means he doesn't have control over his bladder anymore. After 9 surgeries, he still cannot attend school because of his medical issues. Farouk is just one of 6.3 million people who were hurt by the Syrian war. The conflict in Afghanistan has resulted in 2.6 million refugees, with many of them fleeing to Pakistan. The South Sudanese Civil War began in 2013, creating 2.4 million refugees. The ethnic cleansing in Myanmar has caused 1.2 million people to flee their home country. Malaysia has over 160,000 refugees, and many of them are from Myanmar. As we hear these daunting statistics, we often begin to feel like refugees are burdens. We think our countries would be better off without them. However, refugees should not be regarded as unwanted burdens. Through both research and my personal experience, I have found that over time, refugees positively contribute to their host country. When given opportunities to work, refugees can contribute to the economy. In the US, when refugees arrive, they have immediate authorization to work. With the authorization to work and the desire to provide for their families, refugees search for work as soon as possible. Because many refugees who arrive in the US have not attended formal school, they begin with low-skill jobs that don't require much proficiency in English, like janitorial work, agricultural production, factory work, and even being dishwashers in restaurants. When we were resettling Burmese refugees in Atlanta, they didn't speak English, and they didn't have access to proper education prior to their arrival. This led them to work in chicken factories, where they cut up frozen chicken for 8 hours a day. They took jobs that nobody else had the courage to take. In addition to working, they took English classes at the local library. This combination of opportunities to work and to learn English allowed them to flourish. Their hard work paid off with promotions and raises. Soon, workers who previously lacked profitable skills became managers and heads of their departments. These refugees who work hard and integrate into the culture by learning the host country's language are no longer regarded as burdens. However, if a refugee does not have the opportunity to work, the host country's government will inevitably continue viewing them as burdens. And this is the situation in Malaysia. Malaysia has not signed the 1951 Refugee Convention or the 1967 Protocol relating to the status of refugees. Now, that's a long title, but I'll break it down for you. Basically, that means that refugees do not have rights in Malaysia, and by law, they are no different than undocumented migrants. Because of this, they are vulnerable to being arrested by the police, and when they're arrested, they may be subject to detention, prosecution, whipping, or even deportation. Last month, I had the pleasure of joining a pastor as he interviewed Rohingya refugees on behalf of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, also known as the UNHCR. Many of the young men informally work at construction sites, but at their workplace, they are at risk of being raided by the police. And many of them have reported that the police either asked them for a bribe and released them or arrested them. Some of those who were arrested were beaten in prison. This man's name is Ahmed. He is an Iraqi refugee who my family met in Jordan 3 years ago. He moved to Kuala Lumpur 2 years ago, and whenever my family goes down to KL, we always try to pay him a visit. Ahmed has been caught by the police multiple times. The last time he was arrested, he was detained for 30 days and beaten several times a day. After his release, he texted my mom, telling her that he had attempted suicide twice, and fortunately, he had been stopped. He has been searching for work for 2 years, but somehow always gets caught. How can he provide for his needs when he is constantly prohibited from working? He desperately wants to work, provide for his rent and living expenses, and contribute to society. Secondly, just as adult refugees need opportunities to work, refugee children also need education. Over 50% of the world's refugee population are under the age of 18. 50% of the world's refugees are younger than I am. The best way for them to integrate into their new host country is to go to school. There was a study done by 2 economics professors at the University of Notre Dame. They found that refugees that enter the U.S. before age 14 graduate high school and enter college at the same rate as natives. Refugee kids clearly have untapped potential, and not investing in them is a missed opportunity. Remember that Somali Bantu family we resettled in 2004? Ibrahim, the eldest son, didn't speak a word of English when he arrived. At 13 years old, he had never seen a mirror and didn't even know what he looked like. Since he grew up in Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya, he had little to no access to proper education. When he eventually had enough English words to string sentences together, he posed a deeply troubling and disturbing question. "You know this man, Barney? Is he wearing clothes, or was he born that way?" Flash forward 12 years to 2016. This is a picture of Bilal as he graduated from graduate school at the University of Washington in Seattle. However, Ibrahim's story would not have happened if he had arrived in Malaysia. Refugees who arrive in Malaysia are not allowed to attend government schools. The only schools that they can attend are those supported by faith-based organizations like churches or temples or mosques, or volunteer-run, like nonprofits. While these schools work extremely hard to educate the next generation, they simply do not have enough resources. Most volunteer-run schools only teach kindergarten to 5th grade. But what happens to those 15-year-olds, 17-year-olds, even 18-year-olds? Well, you'll find some of them in a 5th grade classroom. This means that refugee kids in Malaysia will never have the opportunity to earn a high school diploma, let alone enter college. Even though they are just as capable as you and me, this is far from ideal. Throughout my life, I've thought about what I can practically do to help this huge refugee crisis. Well, 65 million people don't have a home, right? So maybe I should build 60 million houses. Aha, refugees are usually poor, right? I can become a millionaire and donate hundreds of thousands of dollars to the UN so that they can feed everyone in refugee camps. Or maybe I could become a diplomat and stop wars that produce refugees in the first place. However, I can't even build one house, let alone 60 million. And I'm not a millionaire. My classmates know I can sometimes not even afford chicken rice. And I definitely can't stop wars. I'm just a high school student. So what can ordinary people like me practically do? If you can speak English and understand it well enough to teach it, it's one major way you can help the refugee crisis. Even refugees living in countries that don't speak English, they know that English is a huge door to opportunities. Refugees all over the world want to speak English, and you can really help them if you want to teach them. There are several English centers here in Penang, and if you'd like to get in contact with one, please let me know. Or you can just be a friend. Friends are part of the solution. Refugees have experienced war, death, violence, and utter desperation. Having someone walk beside them when they arrive in a new country can seriously make all the difference. Someone to show them the ropes of living in their new country. That might be showing them around the public transportation system, or giving them a ride to the doctor's office so they can get vaccinated, or just taking them to a park and playing football. It might be introducing them to your favorite music and telling them about what cultural significance your favorite pop star has. These tiny steps might feel like nothing, but you'll never understand how much it means to them to have one loyal and caring friend. There are over 100 refugee schools all over Malaysia, a handful here in Penang, in fact, both here on the island and the mainland. If you would like to visit or volunteer at a school, let's talk. We can go together. If you would like to teach English, I'd love to put you in contact with an English center down in Georgetown. Over the past 2 months, I've recorded interviews with Rohingya refugees. These are real people who I have personally talked with. With the help of Mrs. Roberts, who's here today, I assembled a book that compiles slivers of their stories through pictures and short quotes. My hope in sharing their stories with you is that you would remember that refugees are not burdens. They're people, just like you and me. On my 4th birthday, I woke up to the sound of terrified, screaming little children. Yesterday marked the end of my childhood as I turned 18. For my birthday, I invite you all to donate to the care and education of these precious children. 100% of the proceeds will go to the Sunshine Learning Center in Georgetown, where I interviewed many of the kids who are featured in the book. Please pick one up before you leave. Helping this massive refugee crisis starts with one small step. Let's take one today. Thank you.